Well, this is definitely a hard act to follow after he spoke, but I obviously am not David Cosby. But I've worked with David for almost 20 years now, so I know him very well. Thank you for having me. As they introduced, I am the president of the Palliative Care Division for Gentiva, and I want to give you a little bit of history just so you understand as we level set and talk about value-based care and where palliative care is going. I want to ask you a couple questions. The first question is a raise of hands out here for who has palliative care in your organization today. Okay. And of those, also, how many of you have value-based agreements that you've executed? So we've got a couple people. So in 2023, we as an organization really sat down and looked at what we wanted to do from a care continuum perspective. We have always provided palliative care as part of our profile of delivery of care in the home. But as you all know, palliative care in a fee-for-service environment where you are utilizing either the physician Part B schedule or billing in that nature, it is not a very lucrative business where there is to be money to be made. So essentially, when you're providing palliative care, most organizations do it. I would venture to say those of you who are sitting here and have it today, you're using it as a way to introduce patients into your continuum and then leverage other resources you have inside the continuum, meaning whether you have personal care, whether you have home health, whether you have hospice, you're using palliative care to leverage those specific things. Palliative care as a standalone business does not make money. If there's somebody in here who knows how to make fee-for-service palliative care, I would love to meet that individual because that is, the consensus. So a lot of people want to provide palliative care but don't know where to start because there is an investment that you've got to make up front in order to deliver that care. You see the ROI on the backside with the other business lines, but that initial upfront capital investment, people, clinicians, requires you to have to almost, I say it's delayed gratification. You don't necessarily see it on the front end, but you get it on the back end with your other services. So in 2023, we decided that we were going to make an investment and go all in on value-based care. And when I say value-based care, that can mean varying things to different people. A lot of people, when they think of value-based care, they immediately think of like ACOs, right? ACO REACH, MSSP. But when we contemplated value-based care, we really wanted to go all in. And by all in, I mean full risk. So when you think about a risk-based contract, even with ACO, I know maybe some of you saw the CMS article that's coming out relative to ACO REACH. And that they are going to now require potentially changing it so there's more downside risk. Is my lapel not working? Perfect. So when I say risk for our organization, we decided we were going to go all in upside and downside risk. So the second thing to contemplate as we thought about, all right, we want to do palliative care. We want to do it in a value-based environment so we can make this a standalone business. What do we want our length of stay in palliative to be? That's the other thing from an industry perspective as you think about palliative care. There's no real definition out there. If you look at CAPC or any national organization, the definition of palliative care is any patient who's living with a serious illness. There's no way, based off of all the discussion we just had yesterday and today, when we're thinking about clinicians and we're thinking about how strapped we are to provide home care and not run out of clinicians, there's no way we could serve all of those patients. So it came down to defining the type of population you want to serve. So is it you're going to take care of patients for 12 months? Are you going to take care of patients for 2 years? What's that going to look like? The second piece is we then had to determine, do we want to do contracts with payers directly? Or do we want to go with other risk-based providers such as PCPs? And do we want to get in collaborative agreements with them and basically become a subcapitated provider for them where we are sharing savings, but we're also taking upside and downside risk? And, you know, we talk about yesterday, I heard a lot about clinical outcomes and, you know, star ratings and all of those things that define clinical care. There are no star ratings in palliative care. There's no regulatory definition of what you have to do to provide palliative care. So you as an organization, we had to define ourselves, what is it we're going to track? What is it we're going to chase? What is it we're going to go after to completely change the total cost of care for these patients? So we took full risk. We're focused on patients who are in the last year of life. We're accepting downside and upside risk for all cost of care in the last 12 months. So, you know, as you think about that, that required us to have to think outside of the box. You can't deliver palliative care with a clinician going every 30 days and expect to improve and avoid hospitalizations, to DC unnecessary procedures or imaging, you know, labs, whatever it may be. So we had to define that ourselves. That required us to then think about AI, right? Like, how do you define that population? This isn't a referral based. You have to be able to tell PCPs or payers what kind of patients you're looking for, right? And let's be real, as providers in home care, whether you've done hospice or home health, you live off referral-based business, right? It's a go out to a physician, go out to a hospital. You may contract, but it's a knock on the door, provide a service delivery. We historically, as an industry, have not run algorithms on patients and said, these people qualify, and this is what we need to do to capture those. And so we had to develop that. We have developed our own proprietary algorithm and risk stratification tool so that we can get claims-based data on attributed members, run them through, and then define for those PCPs or providers exactly who's eligible for those services. That sounds easy, but then you got to actually get the PCPs to buy into that. And for those sitting here that, you know, directly deal with physicians, or maybe you're a physician yourself, PCPs want to be able to dictate for their patients what their patients get. They don't want us telling them, right? They're like, I'm the physician, I determine, I will decide. And so it really requires a collaborative, not a vendor-provider relationship, it becomes a provider-to-provider. So over our journey since 2023, we have signed risk agreement, we have developed and defined who we're going to serve from a population perspective. We have built an algorithm to help identify those patients. And then last but not least is once you basically turn on those services with these types of contracts, it is, I think it's unprecedented the amount of business that you get. And I say that we launched our first value-based site in 2023, in June of 2023. We have served since 2023 just under 8,000 patients through this model of care. I mean, once we turned this thing on, it was unlike anything we had ever seen. So between our fee-for-service business, which we refer to as Empatia, we still do community-based in some of these communities, and our value-based business, which is what we call Illumia, we're serving about 8,000 patients ADC right now. We have launched 13 partnerships under our value-based that involve 1,700 PCPs, and they are at risk for just under 500,000 lives. So, you know, when you think about defining care and you think about the space that you're in, what I would say to consider is, as an organization, when you're looking at this, and, you know, one of the things that was mentioned yesterday is we are going to value-based care as an industry. We're not going to have an option, and we definitely want to be ahead of the curve in home care so that we're prepared for all these PCPs that are moving towards more shared savings, more value-based, more clinical outcomes. So as you're contemplating as an organization, it really has become a transformational change for our organization. And I say that not necessarily on the outside, but on the inside of our organization. You have to think differently when you are in value-based care. Again, it's delayed gratification. What we're doing now in 2025, we won't see the fruits of that labor and actually be paid out until the third quarter of 2026. So it is an investment that you have to make to be able to get that on the back end. So the way we refer to it in our organization is this is a multi-year business. What we do today is impacting what's going to happen for 26, 27, 28. Whereas if you think about home health or you think about hospice, it's immediate gratification. You get your daily rate, you get, it's very predictable. You know what your revenue stream is. You can anticipate and then put your costs up against that. In this type of environment, you constantly are having to shift, monitor. The other piece, AI is so important in this value-based environment. The ability to look at your leading indicators to say, okay, this is where we think we're going, this is where we think we're going to perform, because you can't wait until that year ends to say, well, we hit it or we didn't, because your shared savings and that cost that's going to support all of the capital and all of the expense that you put up front. People are expensive. The piece of our business, the clinical, especially in palliative care, if you are hiring nurse practitioners, that they're expensive resources. And so you have to be able to take what we're doing today and say, yes, we are 99% certain we're going to get shared savings at the end of this year because of X, Y, and Z. And so that AI piece has been very important to us because on a daily basis, we have to monitor every leading indicator. And in the moment where we feel like we're going to slip, we have to be able to pivot very quickly. Now, for those of you that are in a large organization, that is painful, right? You take a ship that's moving in one direction like we are with Gentiva, which has, 36,000 ADC. That's a multi-billion-dollar organization. We don't make decisions and then just snap our finger and start going in a different direction. You've got to turn the whole ship to go that way. And so we, as an organization, decided to carve out our palliative division. I run the P&L, everything, IT. We have a different EMR, all because we have to be so agile and flexible in this value-based space that we don't want to have to make an entire enterprise decision in order to pivot and move quickly inside this environment. So, as you're contemplating whether it's, you want to do palliative care or even value-based care with your other business lines, these are definitely things that we have learned the hard way. It has not been necessarily an easy journey. And as you all know, as patients are flowing through and you're caring for patients, you have clinical outcomes and an experience coupled with all of the other things going on inside the organization, right? So I would say to you, if you are contemplating palliative care, the only way for it to be a standalone, thriving business is to contemplate doing value-based care. Our next step in our journey, I told you we went directly to risk-bearing PCPs. That was the step that we decided to take. We felt like if we could prove the thesis that we could navigate a collaborative relationship and work very closely with PCPs, we would get a lot of learnings, and then we could go to payers with those outcomes. For those of you that have contracted directly with payers, that's a multi-cycle year conversation. That does not happen quickly. And a lot of times, one, they want you to have to show you've proven your outcomes that you can deliver. But secondly, unless you're dealing with a regional payer, if you're looking at a big payer like Humana, they want you to go all in. They want you to be able to serve an entire market, an entire state, and so that is a next level commitment that we have been working in the background to prepare for. Still not convinced that that's necessarily the path we want to take. I think regional payers, there's more autonomy with the regional guys, and there's more flexibility and more grace if mistakes are made along the way. With larger payers, you don't get that much grace. The other piece with palliative care, as you're thinking about payers, is historically there have been other palliative providers in the space. And, years ago, there was no length of stay, or, no one thought about how long people were on palliative care. And really, there wasn't a way to show the ROI over many years. So if a patient was on service for 2 years inside of palliative care, the payers kind of got burned a little bit. And so when you're sitting at the table with them talking about palliative care, that's really the first thing they go to is, well, we've had palliative care before. We never could prove the ROI. And, they've whittled it down to a next to nothing benefit. So, I would give you advice to say, if this is a direction that you want to take, start small. Pick a provider. If you can afford to do the upside and downside risk, nowadays, most people won't play ball with you unless you're willing to accept downside risk. And the reason being is most of them are on the hook for downside risk as well. So they really want you to commit and show them that you're committed to your outcomes. So if you can afford to do that, the other piece is in your negotiations for these contracts. If you are dealing with PCPs or primary providers themselves, they don't have a lot of cash. And so, you wanting to get an upfront PMPM because you're going to try to offset your operations, they're hesitant. They want to give you just a little, and part of it is because they're cash strapped. They don't, they have delayed gratification too in their value-based agreements. So you have to determine, are you willing or are you able to basically be in the hole until you get that multi-year payout? If it's with a payer, they're more likely to give you a little bit more upfront as a PMPM, but most value-based contracts for palliative care, you're looking at a PMPM of maybe $200 to $300. If you think about that with your expense, you're pretty flipped upside down from the beginning. So you've got to determine, are you able to do that? So that's why I suggest start small and really see that you can prove your outcomes. The other is determining what your clinical model is going to be. So one of the things that we learned and struggled with is it's got to be more robust than most traditional palliative care services, but it can't be as robust as hospice because then nobody will ever go to hospice, right? And if you are doing an interdisciplinary team in the home, then you're going to want to determine, of those pieces and components, what do you want to deliver clinically? We basically, I call it a diluted hospice model. It gives the patient a taste of what it's like to have hospice at end of life so that they feel comfortable having people come in their homes. They understand what interdisciplinary is at that point. It makes this shift to hospice more seamless. But there's a lot of disciplines we did not put in the home because we did not want to replicate hospice. We also had to determine what disciplines actually go into the home and what disciplines should be remote and do telephonic support. So, again, a lot of things to contemplate as you think about, because you want to make it attractive to whoever you're partnering with. And we're the home care experts. So I would, of the things to consider, those would be the most valuable. Your model, your contract negotiation, what are you able to operationally and financially invest with your delayed gratification later, and then how are you going to track outcomes and prove your value? The tracking of the clinical outcomes, again, another opportunity for AI, another opportunity for automation. The other is considering your EMR and how you're going to document. There are a lot of EMRs that have some components and pieces of palliative care, but most of them don't have interdisciplinary because that's not necessarily traditionally or historically what palliative care has done. The other is scheduling and routing. If you use an EMR that's physician-based, that does more physician-like documentation, they don't have in-home physicians and routing and scheduling. So you've got to think about all the pieces and components that need to be layered in on top of whatever your EMR is in order to basically replicate some pieces surrounding home care, surrounding that physician space or that documentation, whatever it may be. So definitely is an investment of time and resources, and, you know, again, flexibility as you think about launching and knowing you're going to have to iterate over and over again. We launched in 2023. We're on our, what I would say, phase 3 of our iteration. We've already changed our clinical model. We've changed our visit frequencies. We've put care pathways in place. You know, you have to be able in that value-based space to say X number of visits drives this, right? We historically in home care have not had to do that. We just do it because it's the right thing to do, but we don't say, if I do 5 visits on average, it's going to reduce a hospitalization by Y. We just have not done that in the past. So it's taking a lot of our EMR data and what we're doing to using some of the AI to calculate when should visit frequencies be, when on service are patients more likely to go back to the hospital. Are you only going to take care of certain diagnoses? Do you want to take care of oncology patients? Do you want to take care of dementia patients because they have a very long life expectancy? There's a lot to contemplate, especially if you're having to put a lot of expense up front. So these are some of the things that we as an organization have learned. You know, hopefully, as you walk away from this, you know, some things that you can think about and contemplate inside your organization as you decide if this is a path you want to take. You want to do questions? Yeah.
Sure. Have you, like, I'm sorry, from a lot of years' experience, Medicare Advantage, value-based care, one of the learnings that came out of that, and it was kind of unique for me, where we literally started with a contract that would make us money. The very first thing we did was design a contract with the payer that would make us money, and then try to figure it, and we could defend. Because one of the things, if you haven't dealt with these folks, and I've been on both sides, but fortunately I was not on the side when we did value-based care, so, was they will not always pay you even when they owe you.
Yep.
And you can, and you know, it's for, you're a relatively small company, how do you litigate against a United or an Elevance? So they'll still crush you. So it's have you had that experience? Did you design for that? And then right behind it, your AI and predictive models have to support that contract. So we literally engineered from the back end. We learned that the hard way. Has that been your experience?
So the initial contract that we did, yes, we designed it so that we would be profitable. As we are starting to take on more potential partners, what we're trying to do is look at, can we leverage the infrastructure we already have so that we can take less? So creating more efficiencies, so that we can still make a profit, but if not even make a profit on every contract, we at least have to break even. Yeah. Yeah.
Do we have another question? All
Right here.
Let me, can you catch a microphone?
I could have just thrown you mine. You could throw it back.
Hey, great talk, and appreciate you sharing as much as you did about Gentiva, and you're way better than David Cosby. Way
I'm
better.
going to tell him you said that.
Please do. Tom Maxwell said that.
I told him he's worn out anyway, so.
That's right. Hey, so one of the great.
Oh, great.
One of the things we've been really studying at Medalogix and Muse is the ESRD patients and comorbidity, high quality, need palliative care really bad, but those are the patients that no doctor's ever going to say stop dialysis, go to hospice. And so how do we deal with that? I mean, it's a huge problem in the government. It's a huge problem with you know, policy and procedure, but we're out there trying to take care of ESRD patients that are comorbid, have CHF, they're the train wrecks, right? They're the ones that need to be on your palliative care program, but your goal in palliative care is to, you know, push your referrals to hospice when they need it the most. These patients can't go to hospice. What do we do? So
definitely this is a problem. And so inside our value-based contracts, in most markets, we also have Monogram or, you know, DaVita or whoever it may be that are taking care of those patients. And, you know, they say they have palliative care. It's not at the level that we would provide. We actually are sitting down at the table with some potential customers now to try to really discuss this specific topic, because if they participate like in CKCC, there is some concurrent dialysis, hospice, but still, I mean, there's a risk when you do that. What we would like to do is partner with at least one group, let's say, not Monogram, but let's just say Monogram, right? And determine, is there a way we can carve out so that when patients do want to go to hospice, is there a way we can financially construct it? Because if we can keep them out of the hospital, we know that's going to be 18 grand. Is there a way that we can offset that and somehow create a payment mechanism for the dialysis piece between the entities, right? We're not there yet, but you are absolutely right. Like, we feel very passionate about that specific population, and they are the ones that need it most. And right now, they're carved out of so many things, and they're just not getting the level of service and care, and they drive so much cost in the healthcare system.
So thank you so much. Unfortunately, we're out of time for more questions, but thank you so much. And
Perfect. Thank
you're
you.
better than David.